And during our initial stages of the group, we began discussing our own interest level with this particular topic. So as I introduce those within our group, I'm going to be sharing some of those specific areas of interest for each of the members. So for Lacey, her interest level was providing emotional support to the caregivers. Ashley was wellness, aging population, and providing spiritual growth. Becky's was in the medical social work, educating those on benefits of hospice referrals. Christy's interest was making a positive impact on the community as a whole. And me being the only one that didn't have professional ties to hospice work, I had a personal experience with hospice with a family member and was just willing and eager to learn more about it. So we define our issue with the following question. How can we provide more support to caregivers of terminally ill individuals in the home setting within a 60-mile radius of Sioux City? So we believe this is a social justice issue as it aligns with the NASW ethical principles and values. Our primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems, to respect the dignity and worth of a person, and to recognize the central importance of human relationships. We believe that by caring for others, especially loved ones, is part of the human experience. So we need to provide support in an adequate fashion. We believe that this is relevant to social work as it is a holistic approach to the quality of life. And as social workers, we need to be able to provide the necessary tools, resources, knowledge, and support for those in a caregiving role, and to advocate for those that we serve. Christy?
When looking at the community here in Iowa, we did run a report from Hospice of Siouxland looking at the number of families that were served in their homes in 2017. And 372 individuals received hospice care in their homes. And we know this doesn't represent all of the individuals that are terminally ill in their homes and have caregivers, because not everyone utilizes hospice. We'll continue to get information on care initiatives as well as St. Croix, who has recently come to serve in this area for hospice care. And we'll have that information for our paper.
And what we already know about the scope of this issue was put into better focus after completing our stakeholder interviews. After talking with our caregivers and also professionals within the field, three key areas really emerged for us. The first one being the lack of support when navigating the healthcare system. A hospice diagnosis is overwhelming enough, but put on top of that, trying to understand what to do within the healthcare system along with financials can take a toll on the caregivers and also the patients themselves. This can relate back to the lack of funding for general education, volunteer recruitment and education, home health and respite services. Another area that we noticed is being maybe not looked at enough is how well-funded and perhaps underutilized and underdeveloped online resources can be for support for our caregivers. And also rural areas also are put at a disadvantage for support. And Becky will go over a little bit more about what is done previously and currently to address the issue.
So we currently know that there are volunteer services in communities that are willing to help with home hospice patients. I do know that sometimes in the rural communities it's a little bit more difficult for patients and families to allow those volunteers in because they're exposing their vulnerabilities to the entire community. There's also the community support with churches, neighbors, and friends. But again, in those rural communities, you're kind of running into that allowing yourself to be completely vulnerable to the entire community. We also know that there is current grant programs with Medicare. That's the MCCM. So it's kind of like a pre-hospice program to kind of catch those patients that are falling between the cracks. But yet again, that still just doesn't have the support for the caregiver side of things. But trying to help keep those patients that are wanting to continue with aggressive cares and seek that medical treatment still, with an additional support layer, along with allowing them home health or hospice if they're eligible.
Moving into key informants, some different individuals that we chose to interview were hospital, as you guys can see, hospital social worker or the discharge planner in the hospitals. And this varied from Sioux Falls area to Sioux City area. Hospice nurse, caregivers themselves who have experienced caregiving for a patient terminally ill, home health workers, hospice volunteer coordinator, hospice bereavement coordinator, and then a social worker from the Junine Island Cancer Center. We just got together and thought of some different general questions that we can ask these individuals. And then obviously we would tweak them to their profession or how they related to the terminally ill patient. Some different questions that we decided to ask were, what kind of online support would benefit you? What would you find beneficial with online support? Number of people serviced in the past year. We kind of varied if we wanted to do last year or 2 years ago. How can more support be provided to you or the community? Do you know of any support groups or additional resources available? What do you see lacking for caregiver support in our community? How can information be more accessible for you? What were some stresses you felt during caregiving? What do you wish you would have known? And how are you or your organization presenting education to caregivers about additional resources? So we all just kind of got to pick and choose, came together what key informants we wanted to do. As Ashley talked about, we found those 3 primary needs based on this interview, and we also found, looking through, just found some keywords, I would say, as far as what was used as to why those were needs. One thing was the exhaustion felt by the caregivers, whether that be from just everything overall. Financial needs, as we discussed with the funding, the financial stressors, a lot of family discord, whether it's from families not agreeing with the course of treatment, families feeling jealous or not understanding of why the caregiver was so focused on the patient. Another one was change in lifestyle, where just feeling isolated.
2-minute warning.
And your whole focus shifted to the patient. Another one was overwhelming with the information, and like we mentioned, navigating the system and understanding the disease process. So that was kind of our general key informant information. And then moving down to highlighting how privilege, oppression, and diversity may contribute. We discussed economic disparity, economic differences, whether it's the privileged have more money and can afford caregiving or in-home caregivers, or the low income, they may not be able to access the online support or afford to drive from rural areas or to support groups. Another one was English as a secondary language, just that intimidation of not having those information or maybe not having a support group that they're comfortable with going to. And then another one could also be the elderly not having access to the online support, or, same as the low income.
Our group talked as a whole about how this really is a social justice issue, and we feel that all members of this community should be afforded the right to access to support and education while they're caring for their loved ones in their home, regardless of their economic standpoint or ethnic background. Does anyone have any questions?
Good. That was 10 minutes. Very nicely done. Okay, 10 minutes for questions. You don't have to put your feedback or questions in the RISE format. This is a free-for-all. Don't be shy. You're going to want questions from other people.
Yeah, I have a question. Are you guys looking at multiple hospice providers, or are you guys focusing on Hospice of Siouxland?
So there are 3 hospices that serve the 60-mile radius around Sioux City. So that's Hospice of Siouxland, Care Initiatives, and St. Croix has recently come down. So
Gotcha. So I missed that part then. Okay.
In your interviews, did you find that there was one particular group that seemed like it was underrepresented in the hospice community, especially given general demographics in that 60-mile radius that might serve as a focus for some of this? I'm thinking racial, ethnic, socioeconomic status. Did that come out in your key informant interviews?
for me, it didn't. That wasn't one thing that was brought up for my key informants.
Mm-hmm.
That was just something I see a lot, that the research already shows that minority populations, especially the Hispanics in this area, they don't utilize outside sources. They very much are family-centered. They take care of their own, and then they have that language barrier. They don't trust. They have a difficult time even being able to communicate.
I would also say the ones that I interviewed were actually from my area over here, just because we kind of wanted to get a variety, which is also within the 60-mile radius. And Lacey kind of touched on this a little bit, but just being from more rural area and not close to the cities, it's difficult to get resources, to find resources, to know how to go about getting them. So that was most of the information that I got from my key informants.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I was just going to mention too, I think the rural group is a very underserved probably population. Even the hospice workers, social workers that work within Sioux Falls, their radius around the state, it's amazing to me how many one person is servicing such a large group, and how there's no way that one person can meet all the needs of those people on a daily basis. And one theme that I heard, I think it was, again, I read it and talked to Becky about it as well, one of her interviewees, was that the nurses are on call 24/7, but there's so many other situations, issues that come up that social workers are typically more the 9 to 5, and how we miss that, and it can be really key.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or thoughts for this group?
Group that you talked about, is that going to be focused on just the caregivers, or is that going to include, the family members that are receiving hospice care as well?
Just the caregivers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you all are starting to see as you do this, right, is that you have to really narrow the scope so that you can target the data collection. I mean, part of data collection is it's a big funnel, right? And it comes down and it gets narrower, and then you have a strong focus. But especially if you're looking at, then what do we do, right? What's the potential intervention? It has to be really well defined, or else you're kind of at sea, right? You're adrift, because you won't know how to craft an appropriate intervention for your target if you don't, or I should say your benefit community, if you don't have that benefit community really well defined. So it sounds like you're doing that. You're working toward that. And it could be that it gets even, and I'm not pushing you in one direction or another, but it could be that it gets even more refined to where you want to focus on rural caregivers, or you want to focus on Spanish-speaking caregivers. And I'm just throwing stuff out, to where it's like, what's the best way to support those folks, recognizing their particular challenges and the resources, lack thereof, that are there to help them. That helps focus it even more. Other questions or thoughts for this group? Okay. I say we all give them a round of applause, especially because they were first. Very nice. Everybody gets a round of applause tonight, but special one for the first group. Always has to be very brave. Okay, very good. All right, I am stopping recording.